empowers and becomes action. Hi, YouTube. Hi, Instagrams. Good to see y'all. We're here with the Urban View family. And today we're going to have a conversation about what Black Americans, immigration, 14th Amendment, birthright citizenship, and specious claims to lineage have in common. As I shared with the folks on Urban View, before I deleted my Twitter account and then I deleted all my previous tweets. And now I have a system set up where like every couple of days, my Twitter account is purged because I'm not trying to have anything there permanently. I would have conversations before the election on Twitter about the fact that Black Americans were in a very precarious position because we could see what Project 2025 was demanding as it pertains to immigration policy. And to me, it was like clear that we are going to have a situation soon where once they start using these sorts of reinterpretations of the law to deport, and we thought it was going to be deportations. We didn't realize it was going to be straight up, human trafficking abductions, which is what we're seeing right now. Actually, I shouldn't say we didn't. We kind of knew that could happen, but we're hoping it wouldn't. I would have conversations online that would say, listen, Black Americans, they're planning to mass deport immigrants. Just know that this is going to impact you. And the reason I was saying stuff like that was because when I was reading the Heritage Foundation, which I was and still do, when I was reading the commentary from folks like Steve Bannon and Stephen Miller and all the people who were part of Donald Trump's team, it was very clear to me that the forms of arguments they were using to justify getting rid of immigrants, getting rid of migrants, were just a hop, skip, and a jump away from being able to do the same thing for Black Americans. And I've said things like, Black Americans, this also means us. Some of y'all got very upset about that, particularly those of you who are a part of groups like ADOS, where you believe that because I have, or some of you, I shouldn't say all, because not all of you do this thing, but there is a subset of the ADOS movement that really specializes in vitriolic engagement online. And not everybody, but like enough of them to where they feel sometimes like a pariah when these sorts of things happen. Because what would happen when I would say that is that members of this organization, which I agree with, they are fighting for reparations. I don't agree with how they're fighting reparations, but there are many ways to get to Brooklyn. We ain't all got to be on the same page. We just all got to be fighting for the same liberation. And, they believe that, we should fight for reparations. If you can't promise reparations, you're not going to get a vote, which is, I guess, definitely a strategy. But the reality is that if you want reparations, that's going to have to come with a vote in Congress. So I haven't yet been able to figure out how you're going to get votes in Congress for people who you're not voting for. But that, again, we have different ways of approaching these issues. The reason I mentioned them today is because this subset of people, and again, not the entire organization, but this subgroup of folks would sit in my mentions for days, would sit in my mentions for weeks. One, calling me things like a tether because my mom's Jamaican. And I'm like, okay, so sad for you. Like, you're going to miss out on the goodness that's in this space. But, if you like it, I love it. But also would say things like, this girl doesn't know what she's talking about. I thought she was a lawyer. We've got lineage. We can trace our lineage and our generations back, generations. We can go back. We were here at 1619. That's how far back I can trace my lineage, and lineage. And it would be all of this conversation about what a safe harbor lineage provides for Black Americans. I think that we have to have an honest conversation that the current reality that we find ourselves in is one that says white Americans who are in power, and it is white Americans who are in power because they have purged Black Americans from these spaces. They have purged other non-white people from these spaces. White Americans who are in power do not care about your claims to lineage. The same way that the Supreme Court said that there are no rights that the Black man has that the white man is bound to respect. And yes, I know that technically that judicial line of interpretation was overruled and overturned. And yet here we are in racist ass America, where we live a reality where white people do not have to respect the rights that Black people bring to the table. That is the foundation for the conversation we are going to have today. Okay, let me try to slow down a bit. I know y'all be saying, Lurie, could you please slow down? And I be trying, but child, it'd be difficult. All right, so birthright citizenship. According to Gerald L. Newman, who is a professor of international foreign and comparative law at Harvard, he says that the phrase birthright citizenship is used in the United States context to refer to citizenship by virtue of where you were born. Like I said, I was born in Germany because my daddy was in the military. And so, but it didn't matter if I was born in Germany. I am never going to be considered a German citizen unless I go through a process of applying for and then proving some things. It is a lengthy process. I am not, by virtue of the fact that I was born in Germany, a citizen of that country. And the concept of birthright citizenship, which we have here, which says if you're born here, you are a citizen here, and thank a Black person for that. We'll get to that in just a minute. But the idea of birthright citizenship was something that was very common in a variety of countries in early Europe. Great Britain had this rule in place when they colonized North America. The number of the first states adopted it as well. But in the 1787 Constitution, they didn't define who was a citizen, right? And it was basically assumed that if you were a white property owning person, that you were a citizen. In fact, those were the only people who could vote at that time, but they didn't actually provide a definition for who was a citizen. And then in 1857, we get that Dred Scott decision where, again, the Supreme Court says that ain't nobody Black in this country got any rights that the white person is bound to respect. Because no black person could be a citizen of the United States. That was in 1857. The Supreme Court basically says if you are African descent, you cannot be a citizen of the United States, because when the country was being founded, the founders, who were white men, were not thinking about you. And that is true. They were not thinking about us. This is why people talk about the United States as like something where they are striving for a more perfect union, because it damn sure is faulty and flawed right now. But when the founders were founding the nation, they were not, in fact, thinking about black people as being citizens. And the Dred Scott Court, the Supreme Court, said that regardless of what was happening in the North, no person of African descent, this is a direct quote from the professor, no person of African descent could be a citizen of the United States within the meaning of the federal Constitution. This was part of a nationalization of slavery, one of the most important causes of the Civil War. So part of the reason that gave justification for the Civil War was this instruction from the Supreme Court that basically said, if you're black, you could never be a citizen. That was like not even 3-4 years before the Civil War starts. Then in 1866, we get the passage of the, was it 1866? I think it was 1866, the 14th Amendment is passed. The Civil Rights, I'm sorry, let me go back because I'm messing up dates. After the Civil War, slavery is technically abolished. And you have these formerly enslaved black people. And you even had some free black people who had never been enslaved. And they were sort of in a purgatory of citizenship. They did not have a nation that they could claim because Africa was being readily colonized and destroyed, which is something Europeans did all throughout the melanated world. And so black Americans and formerly enslaved, actually, I can't even call them black Americans, formerly enslaved Africans and Africans who had never been enslaved. And I have to call them that because at this point, they were not considered Americans yet. This is after the Civil War. They were in the purgatory of citizenship. They were not yet considered Americans. They were not yet black Americans. After the Civil War, when we get the Civil Rights Act passed in 1866, which was a piece of legislation that kind of mirrored the 1964 Civil Rights Act. The 1866 Civil Rights Act basically was put in place to protect black people, formerly enslaved Africans and other Africans who had never been enslaved. God, we need a whole new term to describe what it was to be black in this country, not quite American, but not really enslaved. I'm sure there's a phrase, but it's escaping me at the moment. But the Civil Rights Act in 1866, and then they enshrined that protection from the Civil Rights Act in 1866 in the 14th Amendment, which meant that now that the 14th Amendment had been ratified and had been incorporated as a part of the Constitution, now Black Americans were considered American citizens, so long as the Supreme Court continues to interpret it that way. And this is the same legislation, the 14th Amendment, that technically said if you participated in a whole ass insurrection, you could never serve office again. As a president of the United States, as a vice president of the United States, as a sworn officer who's somebody who swore to uphold the Constitution. And yet that 14th Amendment, Section 3, which is still in place right now, seems to not have been interpreted to prevent Donald Trump and the January 6ers and everybody who supported them in Congress from being able to be in Congress again. So do you see how having a law that the Supreme Court refuses to interpret in a way that benefits you can happen? They don't care. They don't care. The Supreme Court did not care that from the Dred Scott decision to the Plessy versus Ferguson decision, Black people experience being stateless, becoming citizens, going from being told there's no rights that they have to respect, to Plessy versus Ferguson that basically agrees with separate but equal and Jim Crow segregation in the span of like a generation. Not even a whole generation, but in the span of like almost a generation, they went from being enslaved with no rights to being freed and technically becoming Americans, to going back to being free, technically Americans, but no rights again because of the interpretation of the Supreme Court. So for all of you who believe that you have lineage and you can claim things and you can claim generational lineage here and your ancestors bled and died here, all of that's true. And they don't give a fuck. I just need us to be clear about that. They don't care. All of that is true. And it's going to mean nothing when they ship your ass to El Salvador. Now, let's talk about how we get to that. So I actually was going to have a little bit of a conversation about how a separate case, I don't have time to go into it now. I'm sorry, y'all. I have to edit and produce in real time. There was a whole section I wanted to get into about how this young man out of Chinatown, Wong Kim Ark, was a fundamental part of establishing and confirming birthright citizenship in the country. Just know that the Supreme Court had an opportunity to look at birthright citizenship as it was applied to Chinese people around the same time in the late 1890s. And because Chinese people were dealing with what was called the Chinese Exclusion Act, and so it was really difficult for Chinese people to get into the country. The people who were born here were not having their citizenship rights recognized, even though we now have the 14th Amendment. And in 1898, birthright citizenship is confirmed by the Supreme Court. So I wanted to do more conversation about that. We're just not going to have time because I'm looking at the clock and we're producing in real time. Let's talk about Kilmar Abrego Garcia. Kilmar Abrego Garcia is somebody, a man who has citizenship in El Salvador. He fled El Salvador seeking asylum because he was being targeted by gangs, which is something that is frankly at the heart of why a lot of people are migrating and leaving their country and seeking asylum, because they're being targeted by some of the ruthless gangs that are running South American countries. And I know a lot of people who live with gang violence here might be wondering, like, we have gang violence. It ain't the same. It's the same, but it ain't the same. And we can at some point have a conversation about what gang violence looks like in underdeveloped and divested and countries from which there has been a lot of divestment. Just know that it's the same, but it ain't the same. It's the kind of gang violence that would cause you to pick up and walk with your child in flip-flops for miles, hundreds of miles before you can get to a border. It's kind of like the kind of gang violence that Black people were experiencing with white Christian nationalists, the slave owners, when you would have to pick up and try to run, even though that you knew that if you got caught, you could be killed. The dogs are going to be chasing you. It's kind of like that. I'm sorry I'm squeezing a lot into a short time frame, but it's only a 2-hour show. We got a lot to cover today. Kilmar Abrego Garcia was dealing with like the El Salvadorian prison version of slave catchers, if that makes any sense for people who only have an American context and understanding. He lives in Maryland. He's got 3 kids, 3 American kids who were born here to an American mama, and he is an El Salvadorian man. They capture him, and they being ICE, which to me, quite frankly, ICE should be treated like Nazi soldiers. ICE should be treated like slave catchers. ICE to me is a slave catching organization. Like that's what they're doing. That's how they operating. And that's the frame of reference that I have. ICE accidentally picks him up. They have acknowledged this was an administrative error. He was not who they were looking for. That man ain't got no criminal background. He ain't did nothing wrong. He was just here minding his El Salvadorian, fled from the gang, now a legal resident in the United States ass business, trying to raise his kids and be, living in this country, trying to do what's right by his family. They arrest him by accident, and he ain't the first one. They've arrested several people by accident and put them on planes where he was deported technically because he is an El Salvadorian man, but they got a whole lot of people that ain't never set hide nor hair in El Salvador, who they are putting on these planes and abducting and human trafficking into El Salvadorian concentration camps. I'm not even going to call it a prison. It's a concentration camp. And we have a definition of concentration camp. Hold on, let me see. This is a definition from Max Burns that he points out this definition in the Holocaust Encyclopedia. Here's the difference between a prison and a concentration camp. They say what distinguishes a concentration camp from a prison in the modern sense is that it functions outside of a judicial system. The prisoners are not indicted or convicted of any crime by judicial process. Basically, they have been sending people into this concentration camp without due process. And they say, and by due process, I mean, in the 14th Amendment, you have a guarantee to due process, which says if you are arrested, you have the right to a trial by jury. You have a right to confront your accusers. You got a right to representation. Not all of this is contained in the 14th Amendment. I'm squeezing a lot of contextual and constitutional history into one big thing. But basically, due process says, hey, man, I'm accusing you of robbing me. Now, due process would say, I get to go to file a complaint with the police. I say, this man robbed me, and we're going to go to court, and we're going to hash it out. And then I'm going to get to prove that you robbed me, and you're going to get to defend yourself against them allegations. That's what due process looks like. We go to court to find out what's good. Now, the United States government is saying, well, we arrested and deported these people because they gangsters. You just gonna have to take our word for it. What you mean we gotta take your word for it? You the whole ass United States government, you gotta take your word for it. Y'all the lying ass liars who be lying. Why would we take your word for it? And they're saying, well, because due process does not apply. So they're basically saying we can accuse you of being in a criminal gang, and we have declared that criminal gang is a terror organization, and we're going to ship you to the El Salvadorian concentration camp. Oh, you want us to actually show you the proof that this person is a member of the gang? We can't do that. We're not going to do that. That part right there, that we're not going to do that, that's the lacking of due process. That's what happens because we got to just take their word for it. What they said is, yeah, just trust me. I'm Donald Trump. Trust me. I'm good for it. I'm Pam Bondi. I'm the Attorney General of the United States, and I like to cosplay a whole lot, but what I'm not going to do is show you any of my evidence. That is the violation of due process because you never get to prove whether or not you are a member of a terrorist organization or not. You never get to defend yourself against some allegations. We just got to take your word for it. And so this gentleman, Kilmar Abrego Garcia, was abducted. He was kidnapped, even though the Supreme Court said you can't send him away. And there's been several people, hundreds of people who have been abducted, who have been jailed. And the Supreme Court's like, well, technically, you're not allowed to send them anywhere. They have to stay in the state of where they were arrested. We got people in Louisiana who was arrested in New Jersey, who ain't got no way to get from Louisiana to New Jersey because what the Supreme Court does not have is an army. And so when Donald Trump defies the Supreme Court and says, who's going to check me, boo? The Supreme Court's dumbasses, Chief Justice John freaking the dumbass Roberts, who decided he was going to say that the president has immunity. Now what you going to do? Now you got a whole ass president staring you in the face, kind of like, the memes where Spider-Man looking at Spider-Man, like, who going to check me? Because apparently the Supreme Court ain't going to check him because the Supreme Court ain't got no army. So this man is rotting away in a concentration camp and he ain't got no recourse. Now, the president of El Salvador just brought his ass to America. He was just here yesterday, sitting up in the Oval Office. And that's the clip that you heard, Urban View. I know it was hard to hear, but Urban View heard a clip where Donald Trump is saying, and here's a concern that Black Americans need to have, that now that they have this relationship with the president of El Salvador, Bukele, I think that's his name, Bukele is his last name, President Bukele, and like now that we got this relationship where the Americans are paying $6 million to house just a couple hundred migrants that they say aren't supposed to be here and a part of this terrorist organization. Now Donald Trump is caught on a hot mic and then reiterates out loud that he wants the homegrowns to be able to be sent to El Salvador as well. What is he talking about? He said he gives examples in case you don't know. And we heard it in the clip. He gave examples. Some of the examples were we've got these terrible people who push old ladies in the subway. We've got these terrible homegrown people who are robbers and they do all these terrible things. They're not very good people. We want to be able to send the homegrowns there too. Homeboy, homegirl, you homegrown Black folks who believe that you got citizenship, you got lineage, and so this don't concern you. Guess what? You would be one of the homegrowns. Are you gang affiliated with the gang here in the United States? You got gang affiliation? Guess what? Are you a part of the New York NYPD gang database where any Black boy, any Black girl that the NYPD decides to pick up and take their information can enter you into a database and there is no legal capacity for you to get your name off of that database? Where are you going when they run out of room at Rikers, which you might not want to be in anyway because Rikers feels like its own concentration camp because of the number of people who died there under the current administration and previous? You're a homegrown Black American. You're homegrown. You're who Donald Trump was talking about when he says, now we want to make space for homegrowns. He tells the president of El Salvador, you got to build bigger prisons. You got to build bigger concentration camps because we got a lot of homegrowns that we want to send to you. Need I remind you that one of the reasons that we had so many people coming out of Europe to the New World was because they were the prisoners. What was it? Australia, populated by a whole bunch of crooks and prisoners who could no longer stay there, so they were sent away. The idea of sending away your undesirables is as European as whiteness. Says European is whiteness. And so when we're talking about who has a right to be here, when we're talking about who has a right to stay here, just know you don't get to make those determinations. You don't get to make those rules. You know who makes those rules? The Supreme Court. The Supreme Court. The Supreme Court, which, as I mentioned, has no army, has no military, has no who gonna check me boo capacity. And this isn't something that I came up with, all cockamamie all by myself. I'm not claiming some, level of insight that is not readily available to anybody who reads. Because I read a lot. You ask my kids, I don't, when people are watching TV, I'm reading. Okay, but what I also read was Justice Sonia Sotomayor, who had this to say when the Supreme Court was determining some of the issues related to this case. She says the government's argument, what Donald Trump and them is arguing in front of the Supreme Court, moreover, she says, implies that it could deport and incarcerate any person, including U.S. citizens, without legal consequence, so long as it does so before a court can intervene. That view refutes itself because what had happened was the court told them, don't you send that man out the country. What had happened was the court told the people who picked up that Columbia student, and shout out to Columbia, actually no shout out to you, you suck. I'm just going to say Columbia University, you have just so botched this entire situation with the protests on your campus. You just suck. You're terrible institution. It's a shame that people are still going there. But I get it. I went to Penn State when we had whole ass white nationalists chasing us down. So, I get it. It's racism everywhere. You ain't the first university to be on the wrong side of history. But what we're seeing now is that the ICE agents, the Nazis of the current Nazis, the ICE Nazi agents, the slave catchers of ICE have basically created a situation where it doesn't matter what the court says. If they can move you before the court says anything, who gonna check them? Now, the president of El Salvador, the nation of El Salvador, has actually sent back around 9 or 10 people who were mistakenly sent there. But they're not going to do it for this one because this one is now a political pawn. So I just want you to imagine Black people who think we're safe in this country. And I'm sorry that I got to be the Keisha Downer. I'm sorry I got to be the Denisha Downer on this one. But for Black people who think you're safe, I want you to imagine how many people you know who've been arrested from our community who was totally freaking innocent, who were not guilty of the things that they did. And I want you to imagine, think about all the people you know, just in your family, on your block, in our community, in popular culture, in the media, who are arrested, tried, and convicted for things you know they didn't do, serving time right now. You break them out? People who can claim lineage and think you're so safe because something magical about your lineage protects you from this. Have you broken those people out of incarceration? How many of you right now who know that you got uncles, you got cousins, you got daddies serving time right now who ain't did nothing? Now, some of us got some folks who did something. I ain't talking about that. I'm talking about the people who you know they ain't did. And even if they did something, they didn't do what the government said that they did. But they are serving time right now, innocent as the day is long. Did you get them out? Organizations who believe it's okay to just spout off conspiracy theories and with no facts, no information on that. Did y'all break them out the way they did Asada? Because if you ain't did that for the people who's locked up right here, trust and believe you ain't going to do shit when they send your loved ones to El Salvador. You know why? We see what you're doing right now. We see what you're doing right now. So all of this vitriol, all of this, let's have diaspora wars because you're a tether, you're not this, you're not that, you ain't really got, you can't claim lineage. Guess what? You're going to claim your lineage. You're going to be on a one-way ticket to an El Salvadorian concentration camp talking about lineage. I've got lineage. All right. I hope it works out for you. I hope it does. I don't think it will, but I hope it does. But what we got to be aware of right now is that we live in a country where the law says what the Supreme Court says it means. And then the law only says what the Supreme Court said it means that the president agrees with. Now, I'm not saying we need to be out there protesting on April 19th when the righteous white is going to be out there protesting. I'm not saying you need to move in fear. I'm just saying we need to disabuse ourselves of this notion of safety. And I'm saying that the organizing and the work that we're doing in our private insular spaces, in our non-protesting spaces, the work that we're doing, I just need us to be clear that that work is going to have to include what happens when the slave catchers start sending our folk to El Salvador. And I'm saying our folk because you don't got to claim me, but I claim all Black people. You trust me, I don't need to be claimed by you, but I claim all Black people who are working in the best interest of Black people. And I agree, we don't get it. We don't have it all. We don't have to agree with the same information. We don't have to agree with the same methodology, but we do have to recognize the precarious nature in which we find ourselves because we are all dealing with the same potential for harm. I don't know what lineage is going to do when your loved one is locked up in El Salvadorian concentration camps. I really don't. I hope it saves you. I don't think it will. But I think that our discourse as Black people is going to have to recognize that as much as like them folks voted wrong and it wasn't our fault that we in this situation, we voted correctly. Them folks did the wrong thing. And they like, I get it. But because we didn't choose to leave this nation for whatever reason, maybe because we can't, most of us, or we just haven't. The reality is here we are, and we're going to have to figure some things out because lineage ain't going to save you. And if you are homegrown, determined to be a criminal in the eyes of this Supreme Court or in the eyes of this presidency, just know that the same way y'all ain't broke out none of the innocent people that's incarcerated right now that shouldn't be in jail, it's the same thing you're going to do when they're in El Salvador. Nothing, unless you start organizing now and connecting now and laying aside the sorts of arguments and debates that are designed to separate us and to divide us for what? I serve as a member of the New York State Commission on Reparations and Community Commission on Reparations and Remedies. I get the fight for reparations, but you got people sacrificing relationships both here and internationally that we are going to need. Have you ever been alone, isolated, when you're facing a bully and you didn't make no friends, you didn't make no partnership, you didn't make no collaborations? Have you ever been alone when the bully is bigger and badder than you, and because you abandoned all your relationships and your friendships and your partnerships and the coalitions that you were a part of, now you are facing it by yourself and you ain't gonna win? That's the reality that we face if we don't figure out some way to stop the diaspora wars and realize that we are all at risk. To my Latino folks, it is a shame that many of your community voted in a way that would allow for this. To my Asian folks, it is a shame that a lot of people in your community voted in a way that would allow for this. It's a shame. And I hate it for all of us. But y'all's anti-Blackness is half the reason we're here. And so good luck to the communities that are out there trying to figure it out. Good luck to us, because we got a lot to figure out. And a whole lot of people are spending way more time debating with each other over reparations checks that ain't nobody cutting. Because if you think you're getting reparations out of this federal government, baby, sweetie, hon, Come on. Come on. Let's have a come to Black Jesus moment. Let's realize the reality that we're living in. Not all of us can leave. Most of us cannot. And while you got people online who are camping out in mentions, and I guarantee you they're going to be camped out in my mentions after this. Camp there if you wish. It all my Twitter feed deletes every 10 days. Go with God. Type away. Give me the algorithmic juice as you wish. Just know that these people don't like us. They don't like them, but they really don't like us. And the last thing we need to do strategically is to create such divisions and such barriers between us and other similarly situated people who would be primed to organize and collaborate together. Not to say that we ain't got beef and issues. It's beef and issues. The debates and the transatlantic wars and debates that have happened, there are some real issues and some real hurts that have to really be addressed. All I'm saying is, if you're going to side with the people who have decided to trust that these Americans are going to see their humanity, go with God and maybe Black Jesus, because Black Jesus ain't going with y'all. 866-801-8255, 866-801-TALK. YouTube, Instagram, appreciate y'all. Thank you. Gotta go. Instagram, 866-801-8255, 866-801-TALK is the number. Bye, YouTube. Appreciate y'all. Thank you for all the super thanks. Urban View, we got some things to figure out.